Okay, welcome everyone to our YouTube series on cybersecurity in digital mental health. Today, I have a very special guest who is Salwa Rafee, and she is the Global Managing Director for Healthcare Security at Accenture. So I'd like to welcome you, Salwa, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Becky, for having me. Always a pleasure to speak with you, and it's just great to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So this will be a very relaxed, casual conversation. And I want to just lay out how we want to go about having this conversation for the audience. And so we're going to have the first portion of the interview will be, or the conversation will be focused on cybersecurity because a lot of our audience comes from a mental health background, either lived or professional experience in healthcare, and technology to a certain extent. But there is this gap, a large gap with cybersecurity. So I think we would all benefit from having this sort of sliding window in terms of what are some of the latest threats and emerging trends moving forward. So we'll first kind of do that, looking at from a cybersecurity perspective. But then, of course, we want to sink our teeth into health data. And obviously, wherever we can then push that even further into mental health, that's fantastic. But as mental health experts, we can often come out into the larger, the wider landscape and try and extract some information from that. So we'll be looking at things again, from a cybersecurity perspective, digital therapeutics, randomized control trials, and looking at algorithmic contamination and manipulation of outcomes. We'll be looking at devices and neural feedback mechanisms and manufacturers' considerations. And then, of course, other things as well. So just want to welcome everyone again to this conversation with Salwa. And I'd like to open first because this is a very unique situation where I have someone in front of me virtually who is an expert in cybersecurity, very much so, and within a healthcare setting or context for many, many years. So can you just help the audience see how this all came to light and how your career led you to where you are today?
Absolutely, Becky. Thank you. So I am a biomedical engineer by training, focused on bioinformatics. So all my life, all my career has been on healthcare IT. And, over the past 10, 15 years, cybersecurity has emerged as a very important aspect of technology, of IT. And as we progressed throughout the last decade, everything is being done through IT virtually. Even you see the trends for telemedicine and telehealth as a whole, as part of the industry. Over the past 2 years, as we are all living this global pandemic, everything has been accelerated in a tremendous way. Everybody's working from home, becoming very using heavily all the Zoom, the telemedicine, communicating with our providers and payers and insurance companies and even government through virtual channels. This has made us all extremely vulnerable because the hackers now can see the traffic, can see the huge vulnerabilities within the Wi-Fi systems, within the network security flaws. And there has never been a more significant time for the importance of cybersecurity, especially within the industry. So I have done my graduate studies about, as you said, I was studying EEG signals and differentiating actually mental health issues within the EEG as the decision-based support system. Okay? We used to call it expert systems. Now we talk it about the AI and the machine learning support systems, how the automated diagnosis can support and analyze the EEG signals. So that has become part of my passion. And healthcare, as you already mentioned, is a very vulnerable industry. It's one of the most critical infrastructure industries for all of us. And we talk about it as a matter of national security. When we get hacked, if our systems are exposed, then it is a matter of survival for our countries.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. So that segues really nicely now to the sliding window of the threats in the past year and a half or so, and the emerging trends moving forward. So there was a report, Cyber Threat Intelligence, and this was the summer of 2021 from Accenture. So I wondered if you could just tell us make a couple of points from that, or really what the landscape was, the threats were in that time. And then also, what are some of the emerging trends? So I noticed also, just for example, that it was a 12-day average operational downtime due to ransomware in 2020, and just things like that. So if you could start to elaborate a bit more on that sliding window for us.
Yes. No, absolutely. And funny thing you mentioned, Becky, that Accenture used to publish the threat landscape on an annual basis over the past few years. Last year, we decided to do that on a quarterly basis. And that's just an indication of the accelerated pace of the hackers, of the vulnerabilities, of the ransomware attacks across all industries, but of course, in particular in healthcare. What we are seeing in trends, as you said, exponential increase in hacking, in vulnerabilities. We talk about zero trust in our domain, and zero trust is a big part of the legacy. It's resulting from legacy infrastructure, network systems, the lack of role-based access to our data, even within a hospital system or a healthcare delivery organization. So being a patient with my medical record there, that does not mean that all providers or all nurses can see my record. So a role-based system, identity access management, as an example, is very important to highlight. The trends we have been noticing too is the ease and the inexpensive availability of these services, ransomware as a service on the dark web. Any hacker can purchase for $50, $100 this package as a ransomware as a service, and use it in a very group phishing emails or brute force to just destroy or expose any medical system, any organization. So that has become very available, and even some of the solutions and the tools we use as a solution provider, it has become a tool available for the hackers to antagonize and expose our organizations here. So the trend is quite scary. The attacks, and you mentioned the recovery time from any organization. We think it's actually much more than 15 days or 20 days.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example, and this is all public knowledge of what happened with the national Irish system, the national healthcare system in Ireland, when they got completely compromised. And it was a large ransomware attack. You know, the medical devices were all, the medical records were all exposed. And then there was this negotiation period of the ransom asked by the hackers. The next day, the hackers decided that, okay, they are going to stop that, and they gave back the decryption key to the authorities to, like, you know, take control back of their organizations and the data. And believe it or not, even with the decryption key, they couldn't retrieve their medical records. They stayed for weeks and months before they went back 100% back to business. So this is a simple thing, and I encourage everybody to read about that, how difficult it is when you are a victim, when you are compromised. Your network, your servers, your laptops and devices are all compromised. It's very hard to get everything back to business and to start serving your patients again.
I think I'm just going to interrupt you there briefly, because I think the impact, it's really interesting that as we accelerate with technology and we lean on it so much, that when we have to go back to offline procedures or kind of conventional ways of shipping things or handling things, that can be very traumatic and confusing for humans when we're trying to switch from something so fast and something we rely on to very old ways to kind of keep things going somehow.
Almost impossible, really, because you don't have the history anymore. You're back to the paper-based system. You don't have the allergies. You don't have the chemotherapy sessions that the patient took before, or the radiotherapy sessions. It's just, yeah, it's a big existential, business existential threat to healthcare.
And I was just going to comment on the previous point that you made as well, linking it with the EEG, in fact. And I'll be speaking with someone on a later on YouTube interview, and just looking at getting into the mind of a hacker and really trying to understand. So we're going to be using EEG in real time while someone's hacking in an ethical kind of setting, but trying to really understand the culture. And if it's so accessible, so easy, and I'm hearing this a lot all the time, how can we be there upstream when young people especially are potentially being groomed or falling into these situations where they could become an ethical hacker instead of other choices. So that's another area that I find really interesting, because how do you stop that? But you, again, working with young people to try and reroute that, change the culture. But please keep going, because this is really interesting.
No, absolutely. And we all have ethical hackers. You know, our clients come to us to do the penetration testing for their applications and their systems. So our ethical hackers really try to hack into the system. And the discoveries and the findings we see, Becky, is just staggering. How easy it is. I mean, in 1 hour, one of our pen testers discovered they could easily access one of the largest organization here, and they went. They had the privileged access immediately. They went within 2 hours. They went laterally into the system. They harvested all of the privileged access, and they went into the medical records of patients, and not just names and email addresses. No, they went into the notes, the clinicians' notes, the diagnosis, the treatment plans. So yeah, it is the only answer that I always ask of our clients to do is build resiliency, because it's not a matter of if you're going to get hacked, it's really a when. And when you get hacked, you have to have a disaster recovery plan. You have to have a crisis management plan, and not just an IT or a backup data. Of course, data backup is important to keep it safe and air gapped. But throughout the entire organization, the executive leadership team in the organization, marketing, PR,
Yeah.
how to communicate your crisis to your stakeholders, to your patients, how to recover that, what to tell the media, and also the legal posture, because we know that with the GDPR regulations in Europe, with HIPAA systems, and every single country has their own privacy regulations. There are heavy penalties on the hospitals, on the insurance companies when they get hacked, because they didn't take the necessary precautions. And now you see the emergence of the cyber insurance companies, right? Um, they pay premiums to be insured and covered in case of a cyber attack. And this was usually contingent upon their crisis management plan. And if they have an incident response retainers, a comprehensive plan to tackle this crisis.
And I wasn't really going to go there, but you've just sparked it in my mind. I don't know if this is the case, but I think that in France, they have decided, I think it's AXA, that have decided to not insure ransomware
Yeah,
policy, that's no longer. So the shifting of responsibility onto the provider, is this a potential trend for 2022 and
definitely.
beyond? And even SMEs and very small providers, that sounds very scary to
Yeah.
shift
It's
that.
it's like when you live in a flood zone and you ask for your insurance company, home insurance company, to cover you against floods. Or a
Yes.
hurricane season. They say no, it's inevitable that you will get flooded or you're in the hurricane season.
Yeah.
And that's it. That actually is a strong indicator of how easy it is to be a victim of a ransomware attack.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. So, if there were other trends, I'll pause there, and please continue. Otherwise, we can
Yeah. Yeah.
segue.
Yeah,
Um,
no, there are many trends. We see the accelerated trend actually in migrating to the cloud.
okay.
And we as an healthcare industry, we are usually lagging when it comes to technology and adoption of IT. We are a reserved and conservative industry in terms of spending on IT, on cybersecurity. compared, for example, to retail or financial services. The banking systems are more sophisticated because they have been earlier victims of, credit cards, fraud, or all of that. We are still lagging behind. And our average spend on cybersecurity is only on average 3% of the IT budget, which is compared to financial systems, they are spending 25%. You can see the gap, and you can see we are left with completely outdated legacy infrastructure. The architecture is flat. When we talk about this zero trust, there is no segmentation for the network. The medical devices are out there for the hackers, and we can talk about medical devices in particular, but the accelerated move to the cloud, because the organizations cannot keep up with having everything on-prem, the servers on-prem. So they go to the largest cloud platforms, which have enormous embedded control systems and security controls that they can immediately take advantage of. So this is part one, that the move of the data and the applications to cloud is not a small deed. It really is very complex. It can take months and years for a complete migration and
Right.
adoption. So we can talk about that as well. Part of the trends also is the medical devices, and because everybody's using medical devices, whether they are the X-ray machines and the ultrasound, but also the implantable medical devices, the pacemakers, the infusion pumps that can be hacked. And imagine this would be a very fertile part of a ransomware attack. If your pacemaker is hacked, how much ransom would you pay, or you
Yeah.
be willing to pay?
Okay, absolutely. Okay. I'm a little bit scared, so I'm going to just take a breath. But no, this is very important. I think I was a little bit scared because I was using mental health and analogies and extending to how life or death situations happen in mental health. So um, but what I want to do, this segues really nicely to talking about why specifically healthcare is so dangerous in the wrong hands. And we often hear the first half of the story, which is just how it happens and who's doing it, and usually financially motivated, or I argue other reasons as well. But now let's get down to the detail of what types of data, in which ways can it be used to leverage or to do harm. And I remember our previous conversation, I was already blown away by your ability just to get in there so precisely and to give me examples. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, we've got 3 areas, and then I'd love to you just absolutely go for it in any direction you want. But thinking about digital therapeutics and medications is a very easy extension into mental health. So, and all the stigma around this for medication, and also issues of medication adherence and prescription. So this type of data, could you just elaborate a little bit on how could this be used to cause harm? How could it be used to discriminate once you've got this big data? Yeah.
Yeah. You're spot on, Becky. I will talk about another example that has touched all of us, which is the hacking of this big mental health facility in Finland, 2020, when it's a small facility. It doesn't have the means to provide complete cybersecurity practices or solutions or tools, and they fell a victim to a ransomware attack. It wasn't that hard. It was due to a security flaw in their system. And then hackers got into the medical records and immediately demanded a hefty ransom from the facilities. And as they were doing that, the hackers were looking through the medical records, and they discovered that it was actually a teenage-based. Some of the patients were children and teenagers. And at some point in time, after asking and tormenting the facility for this ransomware attack, they stopped their demands, and they then alluded to emailing every single patient. It turned from a ransomware attack to a blackmail for patients, saying that if you don't pay X amount of Bitcoins by tomorrow, your information will be published on the internet. And if you don't pay by the following day, this would be doubled. So you can see how this is harming the patients on a very personal very personal way to publish their notes. They said we told everything to the therapists, and we were happy that they were documenting, digitally documenting our pain, our traumas, our childhood problems, and now it's out in the public, open for the internet. Um, you mentioned the digital therapeutics. Now we are seeing the trend, and we are working with lots of manufacturers, software as a medical device. So, the neurofeedback records, how this, when they get into the wrong hands, they can be easily manipulated. And we talk about the trustworthy AI, the artificial intelligence, the trustworthy AI systems, because these are all based on algorithms that, if they were hacked and manipulated, just changing a little variable in the algorithm itself, can produce the wrong diagnosis, can produce bias against the patients, can change the entire background, can change the entire outlook for them and the prognosis for the patients on a personal level. But imagine this is happening as part of the population health. So population health, when you look at that, you look at the trends, you look at the genetic forum, you look at the correlation with all of the other outlooks. And it can be threatened, countries can be threatened with that.
That segues, well, it's astonishing and really hard to comprehend, given how severe that kind of damage can be. And even more so if someone is impacted and they're never aware, and they can never have any justice to handle that. But yeah, I think this segues really nicely with the randomized control trial algorithms. But before I do that, I liked the Vastamo example that you raised with Finland. And it never stops me from thinking that when medical records or psychotherapy notes are revealed without consent, sometimes relationships have been patched up or improved or evolved. And the timeline or the dynamic nature of the notes as well, I think is very, it's not appreciated enough, that if someone had experienced something or said something about someone a while ago, perhaps they didn't know that then, but now things are better now, or the opposite could be true. So it opens wounds in so many different ways, out of context, out of temporal context. So that's something I'm just thinking about quite a lot. When you open up something, it can be really confusing to an individual who's trying to heal, or their words are taken completely out of context as well. So
yeah,
but
completely. To your point, Becky, it completely erodes the trust system, and in particular, the mental health domain is based on trust.
Absolutely.
The compromised trust is a make or break for these patients, and if they lose that trust and the support system from their therapists, who are supposed to be the closest people to them, then, as you said, it brings back all the pains and the problems and the issues. And yeah, the prognosis seems to be further and further away.
Yeah, and there's this jarring tension almost between zero trust as a concept in cybersecurity and 100% trust in mental health. So obviously zero trust it's a very good concept, but it flags that immediately to someone in mental health, the importance. But let's go to randomized control trials. This is happening in digital mental health spaces in the UK and other places in the world. So while people are preparing to randomize using algorithms, how does cybersecurity or threats relate to this, and what would be the downstream potential consequences of that?
Yeah, this is why we talk about application security and the algorithm security, making sure that not just they are secure, but there is no bias as well, as you mentioned. A bias against a certain demographic, against a certain diversity group. We talk about inclusion and diversity everywhere now in our companies, in our societies and communities, because we want everybody to be included. But these algorithms can be harmful if fallen in the wrong space. And also, there is an awareness for the coders and the programmers. They need to make sure that we are including everybody in these algorithms. So when we randomize, and I think you've heard of this example before, and in our Congress, there was a few hearings a few years back, a couple of hearings about the discovered bias in against certain population segment, and how we can correct that. So the cybersecurity, extends to not just, of course, protecting the organization, protecting our data, but also making sure that they are trustworthy, they are aligned with what our value system is at the time. And it's not just gearing or protecting a certain segment of the population, it is really inclusive enough. And this is a really complex part, because it includes looking at every line of code within our applications. It includes providing a security from day one. When we design the application on paper, we think about that. We have to include security. We have to include how privacy should be guaranteed within these applications that we use, and how we can implement them correctly.
So is it wrong to, well, first of all, thank you, because I really appreciate that from an inclusivity perspective and a bias perspective, which is very important in mental health, because minority groups are disproportionately impacted with mental health conditions. So I very much appreciate that. And I was just wondering, from a patient or service user perspective, when someone is assigned to either the case control, as the medical terms are, is it wrong to assume that the data will be fine and safe, and this person will never be scrambled, or a cyber criminal could swap people case controls or manipulate the data or the variables or the IDs of the patients to become a control, or to somehow influence outcomes, so that there's no significant impact of the treatment? Or like, this is really out of my knowledge space, but is like, it's wrong, or is it wrong to have that assumption that the data and the IDs are all okay? Or can cyber criminals get in there and tweak even details?
Unfortunately, yeah, they can. And we look at the clinical trials, as you're saying, clinical trials usually are based with a good relationship between the pharma companies and the healthcare delivery organizations, when they pick certain, and this is a very selective, actively selected cohort of patients that they think they will fit this particular new treatment, new therapy. The selection of this cohort of patients should be monitored and controlled. The patients, when they go through the clinical trials, which are usually high risk therapies, because they haven't been approved yet by the EU or by the FDA or the similar organizations. These are very critical systems, and the results based on these clinical trials is the generalization and the launch of this particular therapy to the world. So if our metrics and the way we measure the results are flawed, then we all have this risk of using a particular medication, because the base is incorrect. And you also mentioned the security of this data. Are they 100% secure? Nobody can say the 100% at all, because we have seen examples of big pharma being hacked easily. And also hospital and healthcare organizations are very much like, every day I see the headline news of hospitals being hacked. So the message that I always talk about is resilience. You have to have the resilience, you have to have the backup data, you have to be able to protect not just the security of your data, but the privacy of your patients. And we are all patients at any given point in time. We all go to see our doctors, diagnostics, everything. So our data is out there, and we have a vested interest to work in this industry. And this is really why we are in healthcare.
Mm-hmm. And you touched upon big pharma, and I find that really interesting as I work in the digital space, compared to more conventional big pharma, which I've also done. And when someone goes into the control arm or the actual experimental arm, it's interesting because they know they're using technology, as opposed to not sure if it's placebo, or it's a different kind of and potentially maybe a safer way of knowing. But yeah, it's always a risk of the data, and that extends to academia as well, who have a lot of data sets that if they're not checking if it's being manipulated, just the importance of that. So no, thank you. And so I suppose the last point, the second last point was just looking at devices, which again, you've touched on a little bit, but I was thinking, going back to my work with EEG headsets and just my real world passion for walking around with the EEG headset and just figuring it out in different contexts. The ability to manipulate that, or neural feedback interception or manipulation, how, yeah, if you could just talk about the vulnerability of devices. And I think people aren't really ready or not familiar with that
Yeah.
possibility.
Yeah, no, if you were looking at EEG headsets, and I have seen many graphs of the neurofeedback and how the therapists would interpret that based on their own references, based on their own some kind of algorithm as well. So this is not very hard to exploit. And talk about brain stimulators as well, Becky. If you think there are some patients need brain stimulation to do some motor functions or sensory functions. These are extremely sensitive gadgets, again, based on technology. Are they hackable? Yes, they are, because we have seen how they are, whether they are when they transmit the data to their provider system or to the hospital system. We're all using all the Fitbits of the world, of the iWatch of the world. Data is being transmitted all the time as we speak, and they can be interjected at any point in time with the Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, internet, and manipulated or slightly distorted so that they would give us the wrong readings.
Yeah.
So it is, we work a lot with the med device manufacturers, and the many of them are very aware of that. They keep improving and infusing security measures within their devices, but it is a continuous battle. If you look at the FDA and the tremendous effort that they have been doing for the past few years into getting the med device manufacturers with the hospitals to make sure that it's a shared responsibility, and specifically for mental health facilities and the device manufacturers. We need to have the patches, the simple things, they need to be patched at the right time. They need to be pen tested passively, because we cannot do that when the devices are being actively used by patients. We cannot disrupt that. And it's a very critical domain of the Internet of Things. We call it the IoT or the IUMT for the medical things, in continuous operations with the operational technology. The med device manufacturers use robotic arms to manufacture these devices. And so there is a security part for the OT. If you think about it as a continuous ecosystem from the OT to the IoT to the IUMT, and how the convergence of the security should be top of mind for our regulators, like the FDA and the European Union and the UK-based regulator, and for the practitioners as well.
Okay, thank you. And I'm trying to now tie in mental health and things like DigiMeds and trust. So it would be devastating if there was a situation where a DigiMeds medication adherence provider was hacked, and what happens then? You've got data, but you also have a patient who might be psychotic or having episodes of psychosis, schizophrenia, etc. And if they're speaking their truth, their subjective personal truth, or just the truth that they're taking their medication, but that deviates from the data, you can just see it getting really messy really quickly when it comes to mental health. But you mentioned shared responsibility, which I thought segued really nicely to my final question, which is just looking at how your recommendations really, of course, I'm sure you have many recommendations, but if you could maybe cover a few things on how do we facilitate and empower providers, healthcare facilities, and just any of your guidance really as we move forward. We have our open forums every month, and we do lots of things together this year in digital mental health. So yeah, any guidance, we'd love to hear that.
Yes, no, absolutely. This is the main thing, Becky, and we tell our clients to be ready to prepare for the worst case scenario from day one. know how your system works. Start with a security assessment very quickly so that you can know where the vulnerabilities are, and then plan for a crisis management. Plan for a complete breakdown of your data. Keep your data safe, air-gapped, and private. The role-based, what we see mostly, and the most important thing is identity and role-based access to our data. Who can see what? Who can edit? Who can manipulate the data? It has to be monitored very, very carefully, especially with the privileged accounts and the privileged access. We talked about incident response. It is not just an IT responsibility. It's not just the security folks' responsibility. It is everybody, including the CEO and the president of the facility. They should be personally engaged and involved with every single part of the incident response, because it is an existential problem. And not just for the organization, it's a devastating thing for the patient when it happens. And it has a huge negative repercussions on the total population health. If these, especially mental health, as you mentioned, it's very time-sensitive medications. They take that medications every day, every morning. Any disruption of that would have a very negative, very fast negative outcomes on their families and communities. So the way we help our clients, the entire organizations, is fortifying and improving their posture. And it is an ongoing battle. We cannot say that now I'm secure, I have done all of these checkpoints. It's an ongoing battle because the hackers are very sophisticated. They are well funded. Sometimes they're state, nationwide funded to cause harm. Of course, most are for financial gain, but some are targeted to cause harm and to completely destroy the critical infrastructure. Talk about financial systems, defense mechanisms, healthcare, power and utilities and energy. These are top industries that if have been hacked, then you can immediately get any country to its knees. And mental health stands there as the most sensitive and the most vulnerable, mainly because the facilities don't have huge budgets for IT or security. So it should be a prime mandate for all of us to help these facilities.
Thank you so much. And I just going back to mental health and imagining if there was a situation where someone was very satisfied with the service they were having, it was very personalized, and the algorithms were learning a lot and things were working really well, to have that ripped away from someone, or the data to just be removed from that perspective and to start from the beginning, can be very traumatizing. That you've lost something, you've lost a connection, you've lost your progress, you've lost so much. And medication or non-medication, even psychotherapy, all kinds of mild, moderate, severe, this sense of loss for whatever support. It's just, we need, like you say, to plan for this, and to be prepared and to have resilience. So I want to end there, and just thank you. If there's anything else you'd like to say, I'll just pause if you want to jump in.
No, I'm really happy with the opportunity, Becky, and I would love to participate. And, I think the awareness is very important. Having forums that we can talk with, with facilities, with pharma, with mental health executives, even with patients, because we want to support and empower patients to have control over their data. Who owns the data is a different topic that we should talk about at some point. Who owns the data? Is it your doctor? Is it me? And let's continue to do that. What you are doing is extremely important. To increase this awareness, to make sure people think about that and take action. It should be actionable insights from that. And I'm really looking forward to engaging more with you in your open forums. I thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Salwa.